Hello, and welcome to In Pursuit of Truth and Happiness, Episode 2 Plato's Republic and Philosophical Dialogue. Last episode, I gave an overview of the future of this podcast while also giving an introduction to Republic by diving a little into Socrates with special reference to Socrates not having written anything, with Plato, Socrates' famous student, recording the dialogues of Socrates. In this episode, I will give a brief introduction to the philosophical dialogue that will help give aspiring readers of Plato some tools to carry into any dialogue of Plato, including Republic. The historical authenticity of the dialogues of Plato will not be the subject of these episodes over Plato's dialogues, but I will briefly state that many of the people encountered in Plato's dialogues were real historical figures. The dialogues may be exaggerated, but because the people involved were mostly real, with nothing to say towards speakers that are anonymous, we can conclude that even if the dialogues of Plato are exaggerated, they may have been, and in all probability were, based on real conversations. The historical execution of Socrates lends this possibility a greater degree of certainty. If Plato is guilty of anything, it is not forgery, but expansion of the real dialogues that took place to capture the essence of the arguments of the interlocutors. An interlocutor is a dialogue participant. It is similar to what Thucydides does for the speeches he puts into the mouths of those such as Pericles. This approach of expanding the real words of historical figures should not be taken as pure fiction, but expanding what was really said or recreating what was possibly said to make it easier for readers to get inside the mind of the person speaking. Thus, Plato's dialogues are philosophical dialogues while also being conversations taking place in everyday life, either in public or private circumstances, with the dialogue participants being at the various highs and lows of life. Making a note of Plato's dialogues as philosophical dialogues and conversations, we must make another mental note. When it comes to conversation in the 21st century, we operate off a few principles, two of which are thus. One, truth is entirely privatized, and we must therefore treat truth with a neutral lens because we do not wish to, quote, offend anyone. This is a topic I covered in my episode contrasting William of Ockham and St. Thomas Aquinas. Two, building off the first principle, when speaking to someone for the first time, there are three topics that you never speak of until you get to know the person better: gender, religion, and politics. And for the same reason of not wishing to offend anyone, Plato's dialogues do not hold to either of these principles, even if Socrates' interlocutors espouse these principles. Thus, Plato's dialogues will usually venture into the realm of gender, politics, and or religion, which gives us two further conclusions. Firstly, Socrates and Plato do not treat truth as private, but as an external reality, unchanging and above the malleability of subjectivism, meant for public communal measurement as well as private. Secondly, to be neutral on these topics is not an ancient or late classical reality, but a distinctly modern one. Moreover, because Plato's dialogues are conversations, they contain all the inherent limitations of a conversation. These limitations being clashing of perspectives, misunderstanding of what is said, random encounters that marks the beginning or middle or ending of the conversation, one party being more knowledgeable on a subject than another party, distractions that force the conversation in another direction away from the original question, insults given from one to another to mark the breakdown of the conversation, with the insulted party needing to take the higher moral ground to continue the conversation, and no consensus on what the answer is to the initial question that guides the entire conversation by the end of the conversation. This last point is something I really want to stress. Perceptible readers can read between the lines. and see what Plato and Socrates are arguing, which is what my goal is to present here in these episodes over Plato's works. However, that is exactly what readers must do. Read between the lines, because Plato's dialogues have a tendency to end on an inconclusive note. Socrates, using his philosophical questioning method, will expose the interlocutors as not knowing half as much as they claim to know. And these same interlocutors have a habit of ending the conversation abruptly, along with the dialogue in question. On the one hand, this gives the dialogues a comical undertone, but comical in a constructive criticism sense, not in a sense of being at the expense of somebody else. A type of comedy that encourages those who either know they know nothing to learn, or encourages those who believe they know something to realize there is always much more to learn, with nothing to say toward the measurement of what the so-called experts claim to know. The latter usually reveals the experts to be found wanting. This last point will greatly contribute to the execution of Socrates by the state of Athens, and will be a common theme with just souls that are murdered throughout history. This is yet another topic that will be covered when I cover the apology of Socrates, as well as the works of some of these just people, as well as the works of their disciples murdered throughout history, such as Jesus Christ and Thomas More. Bearing these principles in mind, we reach the conclusion that there is one singular, multidimensional purpose to the philosophical dialogue, and thus to any and all conversations modeled after the philosophical dialogue: to reach objective truth over all in the derivative objective truth answer to the overall question of the conversation. Just as with the Iliad and the Odyssey, the characters of Plato's dialogues will represent arguments, and there will be a character who represents the right answer and those that do not. With Plato's dialogues, it is safe to say that Socrates represents the right answer every time. This does not, however, make it any easier to understand the specific arguments of Socrates in each of the dialogues, especially the longer dialogues like Republic and the Laws. The former will be the first dialogue I cover in several episodes. On the next episode, I will cover the first 4 books of Republic. Thank you for listening to this episode of In Pursuit of Truth and Happiness.